I'm Ashley Klein, 29, and for the past 4 years, I've been the trusted personal assistant to one of Hollywood's most respected actresses, a woman whose philanthropic work and inspiring speeches have made her a global icon. Yesterday, while organizing her home office for a charity board meeting, I discovered a hidden compartment in her antique desk that contained something so horrifying it made me physically sick. Inside were dozens of surveillance tapes, blackmail files on major celebrities, and detailed records of a human trafficking operation that's been operating under the guise of her charitable foundation for over a decade. The worst part? I recognized faces of missing young actors who came to Hollywood with dreams, only to disappear into this nightmare. When I tried to leave quietly, I realized she knew I'd seen everything. My phone's been tapped, my apartment searched, and this morning I found a photo of my little sister at her school tucked under my windshield wiper. I'm sharing this story because I might not get another chance, and this monster can't be allowed to continue destroying innocent lives. Like and subscribe if you believe justice is worth fighting for, even when it's terrifying. Let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand how perfect everything seemed before my world turned into a nightmare. 4 years ago, I was Ashley Klein from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, a small-town girl with big dreams and a communications degree that wasn't opening any doors. I'd moved to Los Angeles with $800 in my bank account and a suitcase full of hope, sleeping on my cousin's couch while working 3 part-time jobs just to survive, the day I got the call about the personal assistant position with Victoria Sterling. I thought someone was playing a cruel joke. Victoria Sterling, the Victoria Sterling who'd won 2 Academy Awards, who graced the covers of Vogue and Vanity Fair, whose charity foundation had raised over $50 million for underprivileged youth. The woman who gave speeches at the United Nations about human rights and had been named Person of the Year by Time magazine twice. Her assistant had recommended me after I'd helped organize a small charity event where Victoria was the keynote speaker. I remember standing in the back of that hotel ballroom, watching her command the stage with such grace and passion as she spoke about giving young people opportunities to chase their dreams. Her words moved me to tears. Every young person deserves a chance to shine, she'd said, her voice breaking with emotion. Too many talented souls are lost because no one believed in them. When I met her for the interview at her Beverly Hills mansion, I was completely starstruck. The house was like something from a fairy tale, sprawling gardens, marble floors, and walls lined with awards and photos of Victoria with presidents, Nobel laureates, and other luminaries. She was even more beautiful in person, with her signature platinum blonde hair and those piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through you. Ashley, she'd said, taking my hands in hers during that first meeting, I can see you have something special. I believe in giving young women like yourself the chance to grow and learn. She offered me a salary that was 3 times what I'd ever made, plus full benefits, housing allowance, and the opportunity to travel the world with one of the most influential women in entertainment. I felt like Cinderella. Here was my fairy godmother, offering to transform my life overnight. The work seemed like a dream, managing her calendar, coordinating with her publicist and agent, organizing her beautiful homes in Beverly Hills, Malibu, and the Hamptons. I arranged her charity galas, her film premieres, her interviews with major publications. I was trusted with her most private affairs, from scheduling her therapy appointments to managing her personal relationships. Victoria treated me like family. She remembered my birthday, asked about my parents back in Iowa, and even sent flowers when my grandfather passed away. During quiet moments, she'd share stories about her own humble beginnings in small-town Georgia, how she'd struggled as a young actress, sleeping in her car and waiting tables to pay for acting classes. We have to lift each other up, Ashley, she'd often say. Women supporting women, that's how we change the world. The charity work felt so meaningful. Victoria's foundation, Bright Futures, focused on helping young actors and actresses transition to Hollywood. We'd host workshops, provide mentorship, and even offer temporary housing for the most promising candidates. I'd spend hours each week reviewing applications from hopeful young people across the country, their headshots and heartfelt letters filling me with purpose. This wasn't just a job, I was helping make dreams come true. The lifestyle was intoxicating. Private jets to film festivals, backstage access to award shows, dinner parties with A-list celebrities who treated me with respect because I was Victoria's trusted assistant. I had access to exclusive boutiques, 5-star restaurants, luxury spas. My Instagram followers grew from 200 to 50,000 as people became fascinated by glimpses into Victoria's glamorous world. But now, sitting here with my hands shaking as I remember those glossy charity foundation brochures that lined Victoria's office, those beautiful pamphlets featuring smiling young faces and inspiring quotes about pursuing your dreams, I realize they were nothing more than recruitment materials for something unspeakably evil. Every success story we celebrated, every bright young face we featured, was carefully selected to lure the next group of victims into Victoria's web. I was living in paradise, completely blind to the hell that existed just beneath the surface. Looking back now, the warning signs were everywhere. I just chose to ignore them because I was so grateful for the life Victoria had given me. But the truth has a way of forcing itself to the surface, no matter how deeply you try to bury it. The first strange incident happened about 6 months into my employment. I was staying late at the Beverly Hills house, organizing Victoria's upcoming charity gala, when I heard voices coming from her private study, a room I was explicitly told never to enter without permission. Victoria was supposed to be at a dinner meeting with her publicist, but there she was, speaking in hushed, urgent tones with someone I didn't recognize. "The shipment arrives Thursday," I heard her say through the heavy wooden door. "Make sure the merchandise is properly documented before transport." Merchandise? I pressed my ear closer to the door, my heart pounding. "We can't afford another mistake like last time," Victoria continued. "The cleanup was too expensive, and we lost valuable inventory." Inventory? My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was hearing, but then footsteps approached the door. I scrambled back to my desk, pretending to work on seating arrangements as Victoria emerged with a tall, thin man in an expensive suit whom I'd never seen before. She looked directly at me, her blue eyes cold and calculating in a way I'd never witnessed. "Ashley," she said smoothly, "I thought you'd gone home hours ago." "Just finishing up the donor list for Saturday's event," I stammered, holding up the papers with trembling hands. The man beside her studied me with predatory intensity. That made my skin crawl. Victoria noticed my discomfort and placed a protective hand on my shoulder. "This is Marcus Chen, one of our international partners. He helps coordinate our overseas charitable initiatives." Marcus extended his hand, and when I shook it, his grip lingered uncomfortably long. "Victoria speaks very highly of your work, Ashley. Loyalty is such a rare quality these days." After he left, Victoria seemed different, more watchful, more suspicious of my every move. She started asking detailed questions about my schedule, my whereabouts after work, even my personal relationships. "I just want to make sure you're safe," she'd say with that same maternal smile that had once made me feel so protected. "This city can be dangerous for young women like us." Then there were the visitors who came late at night, always after I was supposed to have left for the day. But sometimes I'd work late or forget something and have to return, only to see expensive cars in the circular driveway, their windows tinted black. Men in dark suits would nod at me politely, but their eyes held warnings. Victoria would greet them personally, which was unusual since she normally had her housekeeping staff handle visitors. The most disturbing pattern involved the young actors who came for mentorship meetings with Victoria. These were beautiful, talented kids from small towns across America, just like I had been. They'd arrive bright-eyed and eager, carrying headshots and resumes, dressed in their best clothes and radiating hope. I remember Sarah Martinez, a stunning 19-year-old from Phoenix who'd won several regional theater awards. She spent an entire afternoon with Victoria, and I could hear their laughter echoing through the house. Sarah was glowing when she left, clutching a business card and talking excitedly about a special opportunity Victoria had offered her. "I'm going to be in a major film," Sarah told me, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "Miss Sterling believes I have what it takes to be a star. She's introducing me to some very important people next week." That was the last time I ever saw Sarah Martinez. When I asked Victoria about her a few weeks later, she seemed genuinely confused. "Sarah who?" "Ashley, we meet so many aspiring actors. You can't expect me to remember every single one." But I remembered them all. Tommy Rodriguez from Dallas, who'd driven to Los Angeles in his father's pickup truck. Emma Patterson from Portland, who'd been saving money for 2 years to make the trip. Michael Chen from San Francisco, whose parents had disowned him for pursuing acting instead of medical school. They all had that same hopeful glow when they left their meetings with Victoria, and they all simply vanished from existence afterward. I started searching online for these young people, expecting to find IMDb pages or social media posts about their big breaks in Hollywood. Instead, I found missing person reports. Frantic parents posting on Facebook, begging for information about their children who disappeared in Los Angeles. Police reports that led nowhere. Families destroyed by the inexplicable loss of their bright, talented children. The encrypted cell phone was what finally made me realize something was seriously wrong. I found it while cleaning Victoria's bedroom, tucked behind a stack of scripts in her nightstand drawer. It was a burner phone, nothing like her usual iPhone with its pink diamond case. This device was black, unmarked, and secured with multiple passwords. When it buzzed with an incoming call while I was dusting nearby, I froze. Victoria was in the shower, and the sound was urgent, insistent. Before I could move away, the screen lit up with a message preview: "Delivery confirmed." Fresh Merchandise ready for inspection. My blood turned to ice. Merchandise. Delivery. The same language I'd overheard in that conversation months ago. I quickly placed the phone back where I'd found it, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my cleaning supplies. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Sarah's excited face, about all those missing person reports, about the way Victoria's expression had changed when she realized I might be listening at her study door. The woman I'd worshipped as a mentor and mother figure was hiding something monstrous, and I was starting to suspect that I knew exactly what it was, but even then, even with all these red flags screaming at me, I couldn't bring myself to believe that Victoria Sterling, humanitarian, philanthropist, advocate for young people, could be involved in anything truly evil. I convinced myself I was being paranoid, that there had to be innocent explanations for everything I'd witnessed. I wish I'd trusted my instincts then. It might have saved so many lives. The breakthrough came 3 months later when Victoria gave me access to her security system. She was going out of town for a film festival, and I needed to monitor the house while she was away. What I thought was a gesture of ultimate trust turned out to be the key that unlocked the door to hell. Victoria's Beverly Hills mansion was equipped with state-of-the-art surveillance equipment, cameras in every room, motion sensors, even audio recording capabilities. For security purposes, she'd always explained. You never know who might try to break in or what they might be after. I assumed she meant paparazzi or overzealous fans, maybe the occasional burglar attracted by her obvious wealth. The night before she left for Cannes, Victoria showed me how to access the monitoring system from the main computer in her home office. Just basic security checks, she instructed, her manicured finger pointing to various camera feeds on the multiple screens. Make sure the housekeeping staff aren't stealing anything, that sort of thing. But as I familiarized myself with the system, I discovered something that made my stomach drop. The cameras weren't just in public areas, they were everywhere. Bedrooms, bathrooms, even inside what appeared to be hidden rooms I'd never seen before. And the recordings went back years, organized in files with dates and cryptic codes I didn't understand. My first night alone in the house, curiosity got the better of me. I told myself I was just learning the system thoroughly, being the conscientious employee Victoria expected me to be. I pulled up recent recordings from her private study, the room I was forbidden to enter, expecting to see nothing more than Victoria working late or taking private phone calls. Instead, I witnessed something that changed everything. The timestamp showed last Tuesday, 11:47 p.m. Victoria sat behind her massive mahogany desk, but she wasn't alone. 3 men in expensive suits occupied the leather chairs across from her, men I recognized immediately. James Morrison, head of Pinnacle Studios. David Chen, one of the most powerful talent agents in Hollywood. And Robert Fitzgerald, a producer whose films had grossed over $2 billion worldwide. These weren't just random business associates. These were titans of the entertainment industry, men whose decisions could make or break careers with a single phone call. And they were sitting in Victoria's private study at midnight, discussing something that required absolute secrecy. The pipeline needs to be more efficient, James Morrison was saying, his voice calm and businesslike. We're losing too much product during the transition phase. Product. That word again. Victoria leaned back in her chair, completely relaxed, completely in control. This wasn't the warm, maternal figure I knew. This was someone else entirely, a cold, calculating businesswoman discussing transactions that clearly had nothing to do with making movies. The screening process is necessary, Victoria replied, her voice carrying an authority I'd never heard before. We can't afford to acquire damaged goods. Quality control is essential for maintaining our client base. David Chen pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through what appeared to be photographs. These are the latest acquisitions from the Atlanta and Phoenix operations. All between 18 and 22, all meet the specified criteria. My hands were shaking as I adjusted the audio levels, desperate to hear every word despite the growing horror in my chest. Victoria examined the tablet, nodding approvingly at whatever she was seeing. Excellent bone structure on this one, she commented, pointing at the screen. Very marketable. The blonde will command premium pricing, especially with that innocent look. Make sure she's processed through the Santa Monica facility first. Processed. Acquired. Premium pricing. The language was clinical, detached, utterly inhuman. These weren't business executives discussing film projects or talent contracts. They were discussing human beings like livestock at an auction. Robert Fitzgerald consulted a leather-bound ledger. Current inventory is at capacity, but we have several high-priority orders from our overseas partners. The Middle Eastern client is particularly interested in brunettes with theater experience. Says they're more compliant after proper conditioning. The room started spinning around me. I gripped the edge of the desk, fighting waves of nausea. As the full implications of what I was witnessing crashed over me. These men, these pillars of Hollywood society, were running a human trafficking operation. And Victoria wasn't just involved, she was clearly in charge. What about the family situation in Denver? Victoria asked, making notes in her own ledger. Has that been resolved? Cleanly handled, James Morrison replied. Missing person report was filed, but the local police are treating it as a runaway situation. No federal involvement, no media attention. The acquisition will be available for transport by Friday. Acquisition. They were talking about someone's child, someone's daughter or son, as if they were purchasing office equipment. I watched Victoria's face on the monitor, searching for any sign of the woman I'd admired and trusted for 4 years. There was nothing. No emotion, no hesitation, no recognition that they were discussing the destruction of human lives. I want increased surveillance on the Klein girl, Victoria said suddenly, and my blood turned to ice. She's been asking too many questions about the foundation beneficiaries. If she becomes a problem, we'll need to consider our options. The Klein girl. She was talking about me. I was already on their radar, already being watched and evaluated like a potential threat to their operation. The protective hand on my shoulder. The concerned questions about my whereabouts, the emphasis on loyalty, it hadn't been maternal care. It had been risk assessment, David Chin nodded. Standard procedure. We have full surveillance in place, residence, vehicle, communications. If termination becomes necessary, it can be arranged to look like an accident. Termination. They were casually discussing murdering me while I sat in the next room, watching them through the very security system Victoria had trusted me to monitor. The irony would have been laughable if it weren't so terrifying. The meeting continued for another hour, with the 3 men providing updates on various operations in different cities, discussing transportation routes, and reviewing financial reports that apparently showed massive profits from their trafficking network. Victoria coordinated everything with the efficiency of a Fortune 500 CEO, which I suppose she was, just not the kind anyone would ever put on a magazine cover. When they finally left, Victoria remained in her study for a few minutes, staring directly at the camera that had been recording everything. For a moment, I thought she knew I was watching, that she could somehow see me through the lens. Then she smiled, not the warm, nurturing smile she'd always given me, but something cold and predatory that made me understand exactly how much danger I was in. I turned off the monitor and sat in the darkness of her office, my mind reeling with the magnitude of what I'd discovered. Victoria Sterling, beloved actress and humanitarian, was running a sophisticated human trafficking operation that reached into the highest levels of the entertainment industry. The charity foundation, the mentorship programs, the workshops for young actors, all of it was an elaborate front designed to identify and recruit victims, and I had been her unwitting accomplice for 4 years, helping her identify the most vulnerable young people, providing her with their personal information, even arranging the meetings where they would be evaluated for acquisition. Every application I'd reviewed, every hopeful young face I'd interviewed, every family I'd reassured about their child's opportunity, I'd been feeding them directly into Victoria's machine. The worst part was that she'd been testing me all along, watching to see if I could be trusted with the truth or if I would eventually become a liability that needed to be eliminated. Tonight's surveillance discussion meant I'd already failed that test. I was no longer Victoria's trusted assistant, I was a target. The next morning, I couldn't focus on anything. Victoria's words echoed in my mind, increased surveillance on the Klein girl, but something else was driving me to search deeper. I needed to understand the full scope of what I'd stumbled into. Needed to see the faces of the people whose lives had been destroyed while I organized charity galas and smiled for cameras. Using my access to Victoria's home security system, I began exploring areas of the mansion I'd never seen before. The blueprints I found in her filing cabinet showed rooms that didn't match the house's public layout. Behind what appeared to be a solid wall in the basement, the plans indicated a substantial hidden space. It took me 2 hours to find the concealed entrance, a section of the wine cellar wall that swung open when I pressed a specific sequence of wine bottles. The mechanism was so sophisticated it was practically invisible unless you knew exactly what to look for. As the hidden door opened, motion sensor lights illuminated a corridor that led to a room that would haunt my nightmares forever. It was a museum of horror. The walls were lined with shelves containing personal belongings, hundreds of items that clearly belonged to different people. Jewelry, clothing, photographs, personal electronics, even childhood toys. Each shelf was meticulously labeled with dates and file numbers that corresponded to some kind of organizational system. My legs gave out when I realized what I was looking at. These were trophies. Victoria had kept something from every single person who disappeared through her operation, a sick collection that proved the scope of her crimes and satisfied some twisted psychological need to commemorate her victims. I forced myself to examine the items more closely, photographing everything with trembling hands. A University of Texas class ring dated 2019. A silver necklace with Sarah engraved in flowing script, the same necklace Sarah Martinez had been wearing the day I last saw her. A journal with Emma's dreams written on the cover in purple ink. A smartphone in a bedazzled case that belonged to someone young enough to think rhinestones were sophisticated, but it was the box on the center table that broke something inside me. It contained farewell letters, dozens of them, handwritten on various types of paper, some stained with what looked like tears. These weren't suicide notes. They were goodbye messages that victims had been forced to write to explain their disappearances. Dear Mom and Dad, one letter began in shaky handwriting. I've decided to pursue opportunities overseas that I can't discuss right now. Please don't look for me. I'm safe and happy, and I'll contact you when I can. Love, Michael. Michael Chen from San Francisco. The young man whose parents had disowned him for choosing acting over medical school. I remembered him sitting in our waiting area, nervously adjusting his tie before his meeting with Victoria. He'd been so excited about the possibility of landing his first professional role. Another letter was from a girl named Jessica. I know you're worried about me, but I found an amazing opportunity that requires complete confidentiality. I can't tell you where I'm going or what I'm doing, but it's my dream come true. Please be happy for me and don't try to find me. I'll write again when I can. The letters were clearly written under duress, the handwriting was shaky, the wording was stiff and unnatural, and many showed evidence of tears or stress. But they would be enough to convince worried families that their children had left voluntarily, that there was no need for intensive police investigations or media attention. I found Sarah Martinez's letter, written on the same stationery Victoria used for her personal correspondence. I've been offered an incredible opportunity in Europe that I can't pass up. It came up suddenly and I have to leave immediately. Please don't worry about me. I'm finally going to be the actress I always dreamed of becoming. I love you both so much. Sarah. Her parents had probably clung to that letter for months, waiting for the promised follow-up communication that would never come. They were probably still waiting, still hoping their daughter was living her dreams somewhere across the ocean instead of accepting the horrific truth. Among the personal effects, I found smartphone after smartphone, their screens cracked but their memory cards intact. Victoria had apparently kept these as additional insurance, digital records of her victims' lives, their contacts, their communications, their passwords, and personal information. I managed to power up several of the devices, and what I found made me physically ill: text messages to family members saying they'd arrived safely in Los Angeles. Photos of the victims at Victoria's mansion, smiling and posing with her like tourists at a celebrity meet and greet. Social media posts about amazing opportunities and dreams coming true that had been composed and scheduled to post after the victims' disappearances. Victoria's operation was more sophisticated than I'd imagined. She wasn't just trafficking people, she was completely erasing their identities, manufacturing their consent, and providing their families with just enough false hope to prevent aggressive investigation. The victims weren't just being exploited, they were being systematically deleted from existence. I found a diary that belonged to someone named Amanda Riley, and her final entries revealed the true horror of what these young people had endured. The early pages were filled with excitement about meeting Victoria Sterling, about the special project she'd been selected for, about the luxurious accommodations and 5-star treatment, but the tone changed dramatically in later entries. Something's wrong. They won't let me leave the compound. My phone has been taken for security reasons and I'm not allowed to contact my family. Victoria says it's temporary, that the project requires absolute secrecy, but I'm scared. The final entry, written in increasingly frantic handwriting: they're moving me tomorrow. I don't know where. Victoria showed me photos of what happens to girls who try to escape or who tell people about the program. I have to write the letter they want me to write. I have to lie to my parents and tell them I'm okay. But if anyone finds this diary, please know that I didn't leave voluntarily. Please tell my mom and dad that I love them and I tried to come home. I sat on the floor of that terrible room, surrounded by the remnants of dozens of destroyed lives, and wept for Amanda Riley and Sarah Martinez and Michael Chen and Emma Patterson and all the others whose names I didn't even know. These weren't statistics or missing person reports, they were real people with families and dreams and futures that had been stolen by the woman I'd trusted and admired, but my grief was mixed with something else: rage. Pure, burning fury at Victoria for her monstrous crimes, at the entertainment industry executives who enabled her, and at myself for being so blind to the evil happening right under my nose. I'd helped her do this. I'd screened applications, scheduled meetings, and provided her with detailed information about vulnerable young people who trusted me to help them achieve their dreams. Every victim in this room had trusted me the way I'd trusted Victoria. They believed I was helping them, believed the foundation was legitimate, believed they were getting the chance of a lifetime. Instead, I delivered them to a predator who collected their belongings like hunting trophies. I photographed every item in that room, memorizing every face in every photograph. I made a promise to the ghosts who haunted that space. I would expose Victoria's operation, no matter the cost to myself. I would make sure their families learned the truth about what had happened to their children. And I would do everything in my power to prevent this from happening to anyone else, but first, I had to survive long enough to tell their stories. Victoria would be back from Ken in 2 days, and I had to assume she already knew I'd discovered her secret. The surveillance equipment that had revealed her crimes to me was also documenting my every move, my every discovery. I was no longer just a witness to Victoria's trafficking operation. I was now the only person alive who could prove what she'd done and bring justice for all the young people whose lives she'd destroyed. That made me the most dangerous person in Victoria Sterling's world, and the next name on her elimination list. The hidden room contained more than just victim trophies. It was Victoria's private office for her real business. Behind a false wall, I discovered filing cabinets filled with documents that revealed the true scope of her criminal empire. What I'd witnessed in that late-night meeting was just the tip of an iceberg that went deeper than I could have imagined. The blackmail ledger was the most damning piece of evidence I found. Bound in expensive leather and organized with the precision of a corporate database, it contained detailed records of compromised individuals across every level of the entertainment industry and beyond. Each entry included photographs, financial information, personal vulnerabilities, and specific details about how Victoria maintained control over them. A-list actors whose careers depended on Victoria's silence about their involvement in her operation. Directors who'd been caught on camera in compromising situations with trafficking victims. Producers who'd actively recruited for Victoria's network in exchange for her protection of their own crimes. Studio executives who'd laundered money through fake film projects designed to fund the trafficking infrastructure, but the corruption went far beyond Hollywood. Police commissioners in Los Angeles, Miami, and New York whose departments had been systematically compromised. Federal judges who dismissed trafficking cases in exchange for campaign contributions to their preferred political candidates. Border Patrol agents who facilitated the transportation of victims across international boundaries. Even members of Congress who'd blocked anti-trafficking legislation while receiving donations from Victoria's network of shell companies. The financial records were staggering. Victoria's trafficking operation generated over $200 million annually, with profits flowing through dozens of legitimate businesses that served as fronts. Movie production companies, modeling agencies, talent management firms, even several well-known restaurants and hotels, all secretly owned by Victoria and used to launder money or provide cover for trafficking activities. I found client lists that made my blood run cold. Wealthy businessmen from around the world who paid enormous sums for access to Victoria's victims. Politicians whose public personas as family values advocates masked their private participation in horrific exploitation. Foreign diplomats who used their immunity to transport victims across international borders without detection. The international connections were the most frightening discovery. Victoria wasn't running an isolated operation, she was a regional coordinator in a global trafficking network that spanned every continent. Similar operations in London, Paris, Mumbai, Tokyo, and Sao Paulo, all coordinated through encrypted communications and overseen by a central authority whose identity was hidden even from Victoria. The communications logs showed regular contact with handlers in other countries, discussing the transfer of victims, the sharing of blackmail material, and the coordination of law enforcement interference. Young people who disappeared from Victoria's Hollywood operation might end up anywhere in the world, sold to the highest bidder and completely cut off from any possibility of rescue or return. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of the ledger was its recruitment strategy. Victoria's network didn't just prey on random vulnerable young people, they specifically targeted individuals with particular characteristics that made them valuable to their client base. Aspiring actors and models were obvious choices, but they also sought out young people with specific ethnic backgrounds, particular physical attributes, or specialized skills like languages or musical training. The application process I'd helped manage wasn't just identifying potential victims, it was a sophisticated screening system designed to catalog and categorize human beings based on their potential market value. Every question about family background, financial situation, and personal relationships was designed to assess how easily someone could disappear without triggering intensive investigation. I discovered that Victoria had been planning to expand her operation significantly. Documents outlined plans to establish recruitment centers in smaller cities across the Midwest, targeting areas where young people had fewer resources and less family support. They'd identified specific colleges with strong theater and film programs, planning to establish scholarship foundations that would provide them with direct access to the most talented and vulnerable students. The most horrifying revelation was that Victoria's operation had government connections that went beyond mere corruption. Classified documents suggested that certain trafficking activities were being conducted with the knowledge and approval of intelligence agencies, who used the network to gather blackmail material on foreign officials and business leaders. Young victims weren't just being exploited for profit, they were being used as weapons in international espionage operations. Among the files, I found detailed psychological profiles that explained how Victoria maintained control over so many powerful people. The blackmail wasn't just about criminal activity, it was a sophisticated system of psychological manipulation that gradually drew people deeper into the network until escape became impossible. Participants started with minor compromises that seemed harmless, then found themselves increasingly implicated in more serious crimes until they had no choice but to continue cooperating. Victoria had files on hundreds of celebrities, politicians, and business leaders, tracking their weaknesses, their financial vulnerabilities, their family relationships, and their psychological pressure points. She knew exactly how to manipulate each person, whether through greed, fear, ambition, or personal trauma. Some were willing participants who joined the network for profit. Others were victims themselves, trapped by circumstances beyond their control. The network's reach extended into legitimate businesses that I'd never suspected. Major talent agencies that identified potential victims during routine auditions. Modeling scouts who targeted vulnerable young people at shopping malls and college campuses. Even social media influencers who used their platforms to identify and groom potential recruits through fake contest announcements and modeling opportunities. I realized that Victoria's public persona as a humanitarian wasn't just a cover, it was an integral part of her trafficking strategy. Her charitable work provided her with access to vulnerable populations, her humanitarian awards gave her credibility with potential victims and their families, and her celebrity status made it nearly impossible for anyone to believe she could be involved in such horrific crimes. The ledger also revealed how the network dealt with threats. Former victims who'd tried to speak out had been systematically discredited, imprisoned on false charges, or simply eliminated. Journalists who'd gotten too close to the truth had found their careers destroyed, their sources intimidated, and their investigations blocked by powerful interests. Law enforcement officials who couldn't be bought or blackmailed had been transferred, demoted, or framed for crimes they didn't commit. As I photographed page after page of evidence, I began to understand why no one had ever successfully exposed Victoria's operation despite its enormous scope. The network wasn't just protected by secrecy, it was actively defended by some of the most powerful people in the world, all of whom had too much to lose if the truth ever came to light. But I also found something that gave me hope: the network's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness. Because so many powerful people were compromised, they all had detailed knowledge of each other's crimes. The blackmail that kept them loyal also meant that any one of them could bring down the entire operation if they ever found the courage to speak out. The question was whether I could stay alive long enough to give them that opportunity. Victoria would be returning from Cannes tomorrow, and I had to assume she already knew I'd discovered her secret. I was now in possession of enough evidence to destroy hundreds of careers and expose a criminal conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government and industry. I was also the only person alive who wasn't already compromised by the network, which made me either their salvation or their greatest threat. Whether I became a whistleblower or another victim would depend on the choices I made in the next 24 hours. That evening, I returned to my apartment in West Hollywood with a flash drive containing thousands of photos documenting Victoria's crimes. I felt like I was carrying a nuclear weapon, information so explosive it could topple governments and destroy the entertainment industry as we knew it. But as I climbed the stairs to my second-floor unit, something felt wrong. My apartment door was unlocked. I always locked it. Growing up in Iowa had taught me to be security conscious, and living in Los Angeles had only reinforced that habit. My hand trembled as I pushed the door open, expecting to find burglars or worse waiting inside. Instead, I found something much more terrifying: evidence that professionals had been through every inch of my personal space. Nothing was obviously disturbed, but everything was subtly wrong. Books that I'd left leaning to the right were now perfectly straight. The coffee mug on my kitchen counter was in a different position. My bedroom closet, which I always kept organized in a specific way, had been rearranged by someone trying to replicate my system but not quite getting it right. They'd been careful, but not careful enough. Or perhaps they wanted me to know they'd been there. As I searched more thoroughly, I began finding the surveillance equipment they'd left behind. A tiny camera hidden in my smoke detector, so small I almost missed it. Audio recording devices planted in my light fixtures, my television, even inside my laptop computer. GPS tracking units attached to my car, my purse, even sewn into the lining of my winter coat. My apartment had been transformed into a surveillance station that would monitor my every word, every movement, every private moment. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. I felt violated in a way that went beyond physical invasion. These people had been watching me for months, possibly years, cataloging my habits, my relationships, my most intimate moments. They knew when I woke up, what I ate for breakfast, how long I spent in the shower, what I watched on television before bed. In my bedroom, I found a manila envelope that hadn't been there that morning. Inside were photographs that confirmed my worst fears. Pictures of me at the grocery store, at the gym, meeting friends for dinner. Photos of my sister Emma at her high school in Iowa, walking to class, sitting in the cafeteria, getting into her car after school. Pictures of my parents at their jobs, at church, working in their garden. The message was clear: we're watching everyone you care about. We know where they live, where they work, where they feel safe. One wrong move from you, and they'll pay the price. But the most chilling discovery was a detailed dossier about my personal life that demonstrated just how thoroughly I'd been studied. Bank records showing every purchase I'd made for the past 4 years. Medical records from my doctor visits, including my annual gynecological exams and mental health counseling after my grandfather's death. Academic transcripts from high school and college. Even elementary school report cards that someone had obtained from my hometown district. They knew about my college boyfriend who'd broken my heart, my struggles with anxiety during my first year in Los Angeles, my financial difficulties before getting the job with Victoria. They had copies of my private journal entries, my internet search history, my private text messages and emails. They knew about my crush on Victoria's cinematographer friend, my secret fear that I wasn't smart enough for my job, my homesickness and occasional thoughts about moving back to Iowa. The psychological profile they'd compiled was more thorough than anything a therapist would have. They'd identified my pressure points, my vulnerabilities, my deepest fears and most cherished relationships. They knew exactly how to manipulate me, how to threaten me, how to break me if I became a problem. Among the surveillance equipment, I found a device I didn't initially recognize, a small black box attached to my internet router. When I researched it online using my neighbor's Wi-Fi, I discovered it was military-grade monitoring equipment that not only tracked my internet usage but could also inject malware into my devices, monitor my keystrokes, and even activate my camera and microphone remotely. My phone, my laptop, my smart TV, everything connected to the internet had been compromised. They could see through my camera whenever they wanted, listen to my conversations, read my messages as I typed them. I'd been living in a fishbowl, completely exposed to people who saw me as either an asset to be controlled or a threat to be eliminated. The documentation I found revealed that this level of surveillance wasn't unusual for Victoria's operation. Every assistant, every employee, every person who came into contact with her organization was thoroughly monitored and investigated. Most never discovered the extent of the surveillance, living their entire careers unaware that their every move was being watched and recorded, but I also found evidence that several previous assistants had discovered the truth about Victoria's operation, just as I had. Their surveillance files documented their growing awareness, their attempts to gather evidence, their plans to expose the network. Each file ended the same way, with incident reports describing tragic accidents that had eliminated the threat. Car crashes caused by mysterious mechanical failures. Apparent suicides by people with no history of mental illness. Drug overdoses involving victims who'd never used drugs. Home invasion robberies that resulted in murder but left valuable items untouched. The accidents were always plausible, always investigated by law enforcement officials who were either compromised or simply overwhelmed by cases that had no obvious connection to Victoria's operation. I realized that I was following the exact same pattern as my predecessors. I discovered the truth, gathered evidence, and now I was planning to expose Victoria's crimes. But unlike them, I knew I was being watched. I knew they were documenting my every move, waiting for the right moment to eliminate me in a way that would look like an accident. The question was whether that knowledge would be enough to save me. Victoria's network had unlimited resources, government connections, and years of experience in making problems disappear. I was just one person with a flash drive full of evidence, completely isolated and surrounded by people who wanted me dead. But as I sat in my compromised apartment, looking at the surveillance equipment that had been monitoring my life for years, I felt something unexpected: relief. Finally, I understood the game I was playing. Finally, I knew the rules and the stakes. And finally, I had a chance to fight back. They'd made one critical mistake in their surveillance operation. They documented everything, including their own crimes. The equipment they'd planted in my apartment was evidence of illegal surveillance. The photographs of my family were proof of stalking and intimidation. The psychological profile they'd compiled demonstrated the premeditated nature of their criminal conspiracy. Victoria's network had created a detailed record of their own illegal activities, and now I had access to all of it. They'd given me the rope I needed to hang them, I just had to survive long enough to use it. The next morning, I called my sister Emma using a burner phone I'd purchased with cash. My hands were shaking as I dialed her number, knowing that Victoria's people were probably monitoring her communications too, but I had to warn her somehow. Ashley. Emma's voice was bright and excited when she answered. I was just about to call you. You'll never guess what happened yesterday. My stomach dropped. What happened, Em? These talent scouts came to my school. They said they were looking for fresh faces for a new teen drama series, and they want me to audition. Can you believe it? They said I have exactly the look they're searching for. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering onto the floor of the coffee shop where I'd gone to make the call. I scrambled to pick it up, my heart racing as Emma continued talking about her amazing opportunity. They gave me their business card and said they're flying potential candidates to Los Angeles for screen tests next week. All expenses paid. Ashley, this could be my big break. I know you always said I should focus on college, but this is like a sign from the universe. Emma, listen to me very carefully, I interrupted, trying to keep my voice calm while my mind raced with terror. Don't go anywhere with those people. Don't give them any personal information. Don't, Ashley, what's wrong with you? Emma's tone shifted from excitement to confusion. I thought you'd be happy for me. You work in Hollywood, you know how rare opportunities like this are. I closed my eyes, trying to figure out how to explain without revealing everything. If Victoria's people were monitoring Emma's phone, anything I said could put both of us in more danger. But I couldn't let my sister walk into the same trap that had claimed so many other young dreamers. Can you describe the people who approached you? I asked. There were two of them. A woman named Ms. Chen and a man called Mr. Rodriguez. They were really professional, had this fancy black car with tinted windows. Ms. Chen said she'd seen my photos from the school drama club website and thought I'd be perfect for their project. My blood turned to ice. Those weren't real talent scouts, they were Victoria's recruiters, using the same methods they'd employed to identify hundreds of other victims. They'd studied Emma's social media presence, her school activities, her dreams of becoming an actress, and they'd crafted the perfect approach to lure her into their network. Emma, I need you to throw away their business card right now. Don't call them, don't meet with them, and if they contact you again, tell them you're not interested. Are you insane? Emma's voice rose with frustration. This is the chance of a lifetime. Ashley, I know you're protective, but you can't run my life from California. I'm 18 years old, I can make my own decisions. 18. The same age as most of Victoria's victims, the perfect age for someone to disappear without triggering intensive investigation. Young enough to be naive about the entertainment industry, old enough to travel without parental permission, desperate enough for opportunity to ignore warning signs. I took a deep breath, knowing I had to find a way to save Emma without revealing the full truth. Em, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to trust me completely. There are people in the entertainment industry who prey on young actors and actresses. They use fake auditions and modeling opportunities to hurt people. I can't explain everything right now, but those people who approached you, they're not legitimate. How could you possibly know that? Emma demanded. You've never even met them. Because I've seen this before. Because I work in this industry and I know how it operates. Because I stopped myself before revealing too much. Emma, please. Just trust me on this. If you want to pursue acting, we'll find you legitimate opportunities. But these particular people are dangerous. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Emma spoke again, her voice was small and hurt. Do you really think I'm that stupid? That I can't tell the difference between real opportunities and scams? This isn't about intelligence, Em. These people are professionals, they're trained to be convincing. They study their targets and tell them exactly what they want to hear. They probably knew everything about you before they ever approached you. Targets? Emma's voice sharpened. Ashley, you're scaring me. What aren't you telling me? I realized I'd said too much, but I couldn't take it back now. I'm telling you that I love you and I want you to be safe. Can you please just trust me on this? Can you promise me you won't contact those people? Another long pause. Fine, Emma said finally, but I could hear the anger and disappointment in her voice. I'll throw away their stupid business card. But Ashley, if this turns out to be a real opportunity that you made me miss, I'll never forgive you. After I hung up, I sat in the coffee shop for a long time, staring at the burner phone and wondering if I'd done enough to protect my sister. Victoria's people had already made contact with Emma, which meant they'd been planning this approach for weeks. Or months. They had her personal information, her school schedule, probably even her daily routines. I pulled out the photographs I'd found in my apartment, the surveillance images of Emma at school, walking to her car, sitting in the cafeteria with her friends. Victoria's network hadn't just identified Emma as potential leverage against me, they'd identified her as a potential victim in her own right. Her beauty, her acting ambitions, her small-town background, she fit their target profile perfectly. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Victoria hadn't just been monitoring me to assess my loyalty. She'd been evaluating my entire family for potential recruitment into her trafficking network. Emma wasn't just a pressure point to keep me in line, she was merchandise they'd been planning to acquire regardless of my cooperation. I thought about all the conversations Emma and I had shared over the years about her dreams of becoming an actress. I'd encouraged her, helped her practice monologues, even promised to introduce her to industry contacts when she was ready. I'd been unknowingly grooming my own sister for Victoria's operation, providing detailed intelligence about her personality, her vulnerabilities, her deepest desires. The school records I'd found among Victoria's surveillance materials showed that they'd been tracking Emma for over a year. Her grades, her extracurricular activities, her social relationships, even her financial aid applications for college, Victoria's people had documented everything. They knew she was struggling to afford tuition, knew she felt overshadowed by her older sister's success in Hollywood, knew she was desperate for validation and opportunity. They'd crafted the perfect trap for her, and if I hadn't discovered Victoria's secret in time, Emma would have been on a plane to Los Angeles within the week. She would have arrived excited and hopeful, believing she was about to achieve her dreams, never suspecting that she was walking into a nightmare that would destroy her life and devastate our family. But even though I'd managed to warn Emma, I knew this wasn't over. Victoria's recruiters wouldn't give up easily, they'd find other ways to approach her, other methods of persuasion. They might even escalate to kidnapping if they decided Emma was valuable enough to risk direct action. My sister was now a target in a war I'd never wanted to fight, and the only way to protect her was to destroy Victoria's entire network before they could try again. I had less than 24 hours before Victoria returned from Cannes, and once she realized I knew the truth, Emma would become an even more valuable asset in their campaign to control me. The stakes had just become personal in a way that changed everything. This wasn't just about exposing Victoria's crimes or seeking justice for her victims, it was about saving my sister's life and ensuring that no other family would suffer the way ours had been targeted. I had to act fast, and I had to act smart. Victoria's network was powerful, but they'd made one critical mistake: they'd threatened the one person in the world I would die to protect. That night, I made the decision to run. I'd copied everything I could from Victoria's files onto multiple flash drives, uploaded backup copies to secure cloud storage accounts, and even mailed evidence packages to addresses I'd chosen at random from the phone book. If something happened to me, at least the truth would survive somewhere. My plan was simple: drive to the FBI field office in downtown Los Angeles, walk through the front door, and dump everything I knew onto the desk of whoever would listen. I'd spent hours researching which agents specialized in human trafficking cases, preparing my story, and organizing the evidence in a way that would be impossible to ignore or dismiss. I packed a single bag with essential items, left my compromised phone behind, and crept out of my apartment at 3 a.m. My car was parked in the building's underground garage, and I'd checked it thoroughly for tracking devices, removing 2 GPS units I'd found attached to the undercarriage. The drive started normally. Los Angeles at 3 a.m. was almost peaceful: empty highways, minimal traffic, just the distant hum of the city that never truly sleeps. I kept checking my rearview mirror for surveillance vehicles, but the roads behind me remained clear. For the first time in days, I began to feel like I might actually make it to safety. Then my car started making a strange noise. It began as a subtle grinding sound from the engine, barely noticeable over the radio. But within minutes, it escalated to a violent rattling that sent vibrations through the entire vehicle. The steering wheel began to shake in my hands, and I could smell something burning. I was on the 101 freeway, miles from the nearest exit, when the engine completely died. The car coasted to a stop on the shoulder, leaving me stranded in the darkness with nothing but the flash of passing headlights to illuminate the inside of the vehicle. I tried to restart the engine, but nothing happened. No lights on the dashboard, no sound from the starter, nothing. The car was completely dead, as if someone had simply switched it off remotely, which, I realized with growing horror, was exactly what had happened. My phone, the burner phone I'd thought was safe, buzzed with an incoming text message: "Car troubles, Ashley? We're sending help." I sat in the driver's seat, hands trembling as the implications sank in. They'd been tracking me somehow, despite my precautions. They'd remotely disabled my vehicle on a deserted stretch of highway where I'd be completely vulnerable. And they were already on their way to collect me. Headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, a black SUV moving slowly along the shoulder, clearly searching for something. Or someone. I grabbed my bag and the flash drives and ran into the darkness beyond the highway, stumbling through brush and debris as I tried to put distance between myself and the road, but they were prepared for that possibility too. I heard car doors slamming, voices calling to each other, and then the distinctive sound of dogs barking. They'd brought tracking animals, which meant my scent trail would lead them directly to wherever I tried to hide. I ran for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes before I heard the dogs getting closer. When flashlight beams began sweeping the area around me, I realized escape was impossible. I was surrounded by people who knew exactly what they were doing, and I was just an amateur stumbling through the dark. The voice that called out to me was calm and professional. Ashley Klein, we're here to help you. Your car broke down and you became disoriented. We're going to take you somewhere safe where you can rest and call for assistance. When the flashlights found me, I was crouched behind a cluster of scrub bushes, clutching my evidence bag like a lifeline. The man approaching me looked like a paramedic, clean uniform, medical equipment, even an ambulance parked on the road behind us. But his eyes held the same predatory coldness I'd seen in the men who met with Victoria. Miss Klein, you've had a traumatic experience, he said gently, extending his hand toward me. Let us help you. You're clearly in shock. People in your condition often become paranoid and make poor decisions. We're trained to handle situations like this. I wanted to run again, but I could see other figures positioned around me in the darkness. Dogs continued to circle the area, their handlers ready to pursue me if I tried to flee. Even if I could escape this immediate situation, where would I go? My bank accounts were frozen, my credit cards had been cancelled, and my identification documents were probably flagged in every law enforcement database. I know who you are, I said, backing away from the approaching paramedic. I know what you do to people who discover the truth. He smiled sadly, as if dealing with a delusional patient. Ashley, you've been under a lot of stress lately. Your employer is very concerned about your mental health. She's arranged for you to receive the best possible care at a private facility where you can recover from this breakdown. Breakdown. That was how they'd explain my disappearance, a psychological crisis that required immediate intervention and long-term treatment at an undisclosed location. My family would be told I'd suffered a nervous breakdown, that I needed privacy and time to heal, that visits weren't recommended during the early stages of treatment. I realized this was exactly how they'd handled previous assistants who'd discovered Victoria's secrets. No violent confrontations, no obvious murders that might attract attention. Just medical emergencies that required immediate transportation to private facilities from which patients never returned. The paramedic continued approaching, and I could see a syringe in his hand. This will help you relax, Ashley. You won't remember feeling frightened or confused. When you wake up, everything will be much clearer. As he reached for me, I made one last desperate attempt to preserve the evidence I'd gathered. I threw the bag containing the flash drives as far as I could into the darkness, hoping someone might find it someday and understand what it contained. The needle slid into my arm with practiced efficiency, and within seconds, the world began to blur around the edges. The last thing I saw clearly was the paramedic retrieving my evidence bag from exactly where it had landed, as if he'd been tracking its location through the darkness. I woke up in Victoria's Malibu mansion, lying on a bed in a room I'd never seen before. The windows were barred, the door was locked from the outside, and a camera in the corner tracked my every movement. Victoria was sitting in a chair beside the bed, looking at me with the same maternal expression she'd worn during our first meeting 4 years ago. Ashley, she said softly, we need to talk. Victoria looked older than I remembered, her perfect makeup unable to completely hide the stress lines around her eyes. She was still beautiful, still commanding, but there was something different about her now that I knew the truth. The mask had slipped, and I could see the predator beneath the humanitarian facade. I'm disappointed in you, Ashley, she said, crossing her legs and studying me with clinical detachment. I genuinely hoped you'd be different from the others. Smarter. More loyal. More appreciative of the opportunities I've given you. I tried to sit up, but my head was still foggy from whatever they'd injected me with. The others? You mean your other assistants who discovered what you really are? Victoria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Oh, Ashley. You still don't understand, do you? There are no other assistants. There's only you, and the choice you're about to make. She stood and walked to a small table where a leather portfolio waited. When she opened it, I could see legal documents inside, contracts, agreements, forms with official-looking seals and signatures. You see, my dear, everyone who discovers the truth about our operation faces the same decision. They can fight against us, in which case they become a liability that must be eliminated. Or they can join us, in which case they become a valuable partner in our enterprise. She pulled out a thick contract and placed it on the bed beside me. This is a partnership agreement, Ashley. Sign it, and you'll become a full participant in our network. You'll receive a signing bonus of $5 million, a guaranteed annual income of $2 million, and access to resources and connections that could make you one of the most powerful women in Hollywood. I stared at the document, recognizing it as the membership contract I'd seen references to in Victoria's files. The legal language was complex, but the basic terms were clear. I would become a willing participant in human trafficking, money laundering, blackmail, and murder in exchange for wealth and protection. And if I refuse? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Then you'll suffer an unfortunate accident, just like the brave souls who thought they could expose our operation. Victoria's voice remained conversational, as if discussing the weather. Car crashes are so tragic, especially when they involve young women with their whole lives ahead of them. She sat back down and opened another section of the portfolio. But before you make your decision, let me show you what you'd be joining. This isn't some crude criminal enterprise, Ashley. This is a sophisticated business operation that provides valuable services to very important people. The photographs she showed me were nauseating. Powerful men I recognized from news programs and movie premieres, photographed in compromising situations with young victims who looked barely conscious. Politicians whose public personas as family values advocates were exposed as fraudulent by images of their participation in horrific exploitation. These people depend on us, Victoria explained, as if showing me a normal business presentation. We provide them with experiences they can't obtain through conventional means, and in return, they provide us with protection, influence, and access. It's a mutually beneficial relationship that's been operating successfully for decades. She showed me financial records that demonstrated the staggering profitability of the operation. Hundreds of millions of dollars flowing through legitimate businesses, offshore accounts, and shell companies. Real estate portfolios, investment funds, even ownership stakes in major entertainment companies, all funded by the systematic exploitation of vulnerable young people. You could be part of this, Ashley. You have the skills, the intelligence, and now the knowledge to be incredibly valuable to our network. Your clean background, your connection to the legitimate entertainment industry, your ability to identify and recruit potential candidates, you could be running your own regional operation within 5 years. The most horrifying part was that she was right. I did have the skills they needed. For years of working as Victoria's assistant had given me intimate knowledge of how the entertainment industry operated, extensive contacts throughout Hollywood, and experience in identifying vulnerable young people who dreamed of stardom. I could see the career path she was offering me, starting as a junior partner, gradually taking on more responsibility, eventually running my own trafficking operation in another city or country. I'd have unlimited wealth, powerful connections, and the protection of a network that reached into every level of government and industry. All I had to do was agree to become a monster. I need time to think, I said, stalling while my mind raced through possible escape scenarios. Victoria laughed, a sound that contained no warmth or humor. Oh, my dear girl. You think this is a negotiation? You think you have options? She pressed a button on her phone, and the door opened to admit 2 men I recognized from the surveillance footage, Marcus Chen and Robert Fitzgerald, the studio executive and producer who'd attended that midnight meeting. Gentlemen, Victoria said, please explain to Ashley what happens to people who refuse our generous offer. Marcus Chen pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through photographs that made my stomach lurch. Crime scene photos of car accidents, apparent suicides, drug overdoses, all featuring people who looked healthy and successful in their before pictures but were dead in ways that seemed suspicious once you knew the context. These were all people who chose poorly, Robert Fitzgerald explained in a matter-of-fact tone. Journalists who got too close to the truth. Former employees who suffered attacks of conscience. Law enforcement officials who couldn't be bought or intimidated. They all thought they could fight against something bigger than themselves. He showed me a photo that made me gasp, a young woman who looked remarkably like me, lying in what appeared to be a staged suicide scene. This was Victoria's previous assistant, Rebecca Morrison. Brilliant girl, very dedicated, very loyal, until she discovered some files she shouldn't have seen. She chose to fight rather than join us. Victoria nodded sadly. Rebecca was found in her apartment, apparently having overdosed on prescription medications. Very tragic, she'd been struggling with depression and anxiety, according to her therapist's records. The suicide note was very convincing, especially since it was written In her own handwriting. The implication was clear: they had the resources to stage my death in any way they chose, complete with medical records, witness statements, and physical evidence that would convince investigators and my family that I'd taken my own life. But they were also showing me something else: the other people they'd initiated into their network. I saw photos of men and women who'd started as victims or reluctant participants but had gradually become willing collaborators. Former law enforcement officials who now helped cover up the network's crimes. Ex-prosecutors who ensured trafficking cases never made it to trial. Social workers who identified vulnerable children for recruitment. The network didn't just corrupt people through greed, it corrupted them through complicity. Once someone participated in even minor aspects of the operation, they became implicated in the larger conspiracy. Each small compromise led to bigger ones, until escape became impossible and cooperation became the only path to survival. "You have until tomorrow morning to decide," Victoria said, closing the portfolio. "Sign the contract and become wealthy beyond your dreams, or refuse and join Rebecca in whatever comes after this life." As they left me alone in the locked room, I realized that Victoria had made one critical error in her presentation. She'd shown me proof that other people had been offered the same choice, which meant there had to be records of those offers, documentation of the initiation process, evidence of how the network recruited and controlled its members, and if there were records, there were also people who knew how the system worked, people who might be willing to help destroy it if they could find a way to do so safely. Victoria's network wasn't just a criminal conspiracy, it was also a collection of prisoners, all trapped by their own complicity and desperate for a way out. I just had to find a way to contact them before tomorrow morning's deadline arrived. That evening, Victoria returned with what she called a comprehensive orientation to help me understand the full scope of what I'd be joining. She wheeled in a presentation screen and began what felt like the most horrifying business meeting of my life. "Since you're going to be part of our family," she said, clicking to the first slide, "you need to understand that what you discovered in my files is just one small piece of a much larger operation." The presentation began with an organizational chart that made my blood run cold. Victoria's Hollywood trafficking network was labeled as West Coast Regional Division, implying there were other divisions operating across the United States and internationally. Names and photos of coordinators in New York, Miami, Chicago, and Atlanta filled the screen, all appearing to be respected members of their communities who secretly ran operations identical to Victoria's. "Our network spans 6 continents," Victoria explained with the pride of a CEO presenting quarterly results. "We coordinate with partners in London, Paris, Mumbai, Tokyo, Sao Paulo, and Sydney. Each regional operation specializes in different types of recruitment and serves different client bases." She clicked to a world map dotted with locations, each representing what she called acquisition centers and processing facilities. The scope was staggering. This wasn't just a Hollywood problem or even an American problem. It was a global enterprise that treated human beings as commodities to be harvested, processed, and distributed to the highest bidders. "The entertainment industry connection is particularly valuable," Victoria continued, "because it provides perfect cover for international travel and the movement of young people across borders. A modeling agency sponsoring work visas, a film production company bringing in background actors, a talent management firm arranging international auditions, all completely legitimate businesses that happen to serve our secondary purposes." The client database she showed me was beyond comprehension. Wealthy businessmen, politicians, foreign diplomats, even members of royal families from countries I couldn't pronounce. Each client had a detailed profile showing their preferences, their financial capacity, and their level of security clearance for particularly sensitive transactions. "Our premium clients pay between $500,000 and $2 million. For exclusive access," Victoria explained matter-of-factly. "We also offer subscription services for repeat customers and bulk discounts for clients who make multiple acquisitions. It's really quite sophisticated from a business perspective." She showed me communication logs between regional coordinators, discussing the transfer of victims like shipping manifests. "London is requesting 3 blonde females, age 18 to 20, with theater training for a diplomatic client in the Middle East. Tokyo has surplus brunette inventory and is offering trade arrangements. Sao Paulo needs male subjects for a mining operation in Africa." The casual language they used was designed to dehumanize the victims, making it easier for participants to rationalize their involvement. They never used words like people or victims, it was always inventory, merchandise, acquisitions, or product. The psychological distance created by this language allowed even decent people to gradually accept the unacceptable, but perhaps the most disturbing revelation was the political protection the network enjoyed. Victoria showed me classified documents. That proved certain governments not only knew about the trafficking operations but actively facilitated them for intelligence purposes. Young victims placed with foreign officials provide excellent opportunities for gathering blackmail material, Victoria explained. Intelligence agencies in multiple countries use our services to compromise targets they want to control. It's a win-win arrangement. We profit from the transactions, and they gain valuable leverage over their adversaries. The financial records were staggering. The global network generated over $2 billion annually, with profits flowing through a complex web of legitimate businesses, offshore accounts, and shell companies. Major banks, investment firms, even charitable foundations unknowingly handled money that originated from human trafficking. We've diversified significantly over the years, Victoria said, showing slides detailing the network's business portfolio. Real estate development, technology investments, media companies, pharmaceutical research, we're involved in every sector of the legitimate economy. I realized that the network had become too big to fail. Too many legitimate businesses depended on its capital, too many powerful people were compromised by its services, too many governments relied on its intelligence value. Even if law enforcement wanted to shut it down, the economic and political consequences would be catastrophic. Victoria showed me recruitment strategies that were being deployed globally. Social media campaigns designed to identify vulnerable young people through their online activity. Modeling contests and talent searches that served as cover for systematic evaluation of potential victims. Even educational exchange programs that provided access to international students far from their families and support systems. Technology has revolutionized our efficiency, Victoria explained, displaying algorithms that analyzed social media profiles to identify ideal targets. We can predict with 93% accuracy which young people will be most suitable for our purposes based purely on their online behavior and social connections. The network had infiltrated legitimate organizations in ways I'd never imagined. Talent agencies that steered vulnerable clients toward trafficking situations. Modeling schools that identified students for recruitment. Even social services agencies that provided the network with access to foster children and runaways who had no family protection. The beauty of our system, Victoria said, is that it's largely self-sustaining. Victims who survive their initial placement often become recruiters themselves, either voluntarily or through coercion. Former law enforcement officials provide security services. Ex-prosecutors handle legal challenges. Everyone becomes complicit, which ensures loyalty and silence. She showed me personnel files for network employees, people who'd started as victims, investigators, or reluctant participants but had gradually become essential components of the operation. Their transformation from opponents to collaborators was documented with the precision of psychological case studies. This is your future, Ashley, Victoria concluded, turning off the presentation. You can spend your life fighting against something that's too powerful to be defeated, or you can become part of something that offers unlimited opportunities for wealth, influence, and personal advancement. As she prepared to leave, Victoria handed me a secure tablet loaded with additional information about the network's operations. Study this tonight, she said. Tomorrow morning, you'll either sign our partnership agreement or join the list of people who made poor decisions about their futures. Alone with the tablet, I began to understand why no one had ever successfully exposed the network despite its enormous scope. It wasn't just protected by secrecy, it was protected by its own success. The network had become so integrated into legitimate society, so essential to powerful interests, so profitable for so many people, that destroying it would require dismantling significant portions of the global economy and political system. But as I scrolled through the files, I also began to see potential weaknesses in what appeared to be an invincible system. The network's greatest strength, its complexity and interconnectedness, was also its greatest vulnerability. Because so many people were involved, there were thousands of potential leaks, thousands of people who might cooperate with law enforcement if given the right incentives or protection. The question was whether I could identify those potential allies and find a way to contact them before Victoria's deadline expired. I had less than 12 hours to figure out how to destroy a criminal empire that had taken decades to build and had successfully eliminated everyone who'd previously tried to expose it. The tablet in my hands contained enough evidence to convict thousands of people and save thousands of victims. But it was also documenting my own knowledge of the network's operations, making me either a valuable asset or a liability that needed immediate elimination. By tomorrow morning, I would either be a millionaire partner in the world's largest trafficking network, or I would be dead. The choice was mine, but the options had been carefully designed to ensure that survival required complicity and resistance meant death, unless I could find a third option that Victoria and her partners hadn't anticipated. At 3 a.m., I made a decision that would either save my life or end it. Using the secure tablet Victoria had given me, I began sending anonymous messages to potential victims whose information I found in the network's recruitment database. The tablet was supposed to be for studying the network's operations, but Victoria had underestimated my technical skills. Years of managing her digital life had taught me how to navigate secure systems, and the device's encryption was designed to keep outsiders from getting in, not to prevent insiders from communicating out. I started with 3 young actors who were scheduled for mentorship meetings in the coming weeks. Using encrypted messaging apps that the network itself employed for communication, I sent carefully worded warnings that wouldn't immediately reveal my identity or location. "The Los Angeles opportunity you've been offered isn't legitimate," I typed to Sarah Chen, an 18-year-old from Portland whose audition video had caught Victoria's attention. "Research human trafficking in entertainment industry before you travel. Trust your instincts if anything feels wrong." To Marcus Williams in Atlanta, "The modeling contract is a scam designed to hurt you. Contact local FBI field office if anyone pressures you to travel or sign agreements. Your safety is more important than any opportunity." To Emma Rodriguez in Phoenix, "The talent scouts are not who they claim to be. Do not meet with them privately or provide personal information. Tell your parents everything and document all contact attempts." Each message felt like throwing a lifeline into an ocean, hoping someone would grab it before drowning. I couldn't provide detailed explanations without revealing that I had access to the network's internal systems, but I hoped the warnings would at least make these young people more cautious about opportunities that seemed too good to be true. As I worked through the night, I discovered something that changed my understanding of the situation entirely. Hidden within the network's personnel files were records of other people who'd tried to work from within the system to save victims, and some of them were still alive. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a therapist who'd been coerced into providing psychological evaluations of trafficking victims, had been secretly documenting the network's operations for 2 years. Her files showed that she'd managed to help 17 people escape by providing them with false psychological assessments that made them appear unsuitable for trafficking. Agent Michael Torres, an FBI investigator whose family had been threatened to ensure his cooperation, had been feeding false information to the network while secretly building a case file that could eventually be used for prosecution. His records showed dozens of saved communications, recorded conversations, and documented evidence of criminal activity. Detective Lisa Chen, an LAPD officer who'd been blackmailed into ignoring trafficking cases, had been creating detailed records of every crime she'd been forced to overlook. Her files contained witness statements, physical evidence, and documentation that could support hundreds of prosecutions. These people hadn't signed partnership agreements, they were prisoners who'd found ways to resist from within the system. And if I could contact them, we might be able to coordinate an operation that could damage the network more effectively than any single whistleblower could achieve alone. Using the tablet's communication system, I began reaching out to these reluctant collaborators. I had to be extremely careful. The network monitored all communications, and any obvious coordination attempt would trigger immediate retaliation against everyone involved. "Jennifer," I messaged Dr. Walsh, "the Klein evaluation scheduled for tomorrow needs special attention. Subject may be suitable for relocation program discussed in previous consultation." It was coded language that I hoped she'd understand. If she was really trying to help victims escape, she might recognize that I was offering her an opportunity to help me while providing cover for her own resistance activities. Agent Torres received a message about irregular patterns in West Coast shipping schedules that might require enhanced monitoring protocols. Detective Chen got an update about inventory discrepancies that might need internal investigation procedures. Within hours, I began receiving responses that confirmed my hopes. These people had been waiting for an opportunity to coordinate their resistance efforts, and my access to the network's internal systems provided the communication channel they needed. Dr. Walsh confirmed that she'd been systematically providing false evaluations and could help coordinate victim extractions. Agent Torres revealed that he'd been building a federal case but needed evidence that could be obtained without compromising his family's safety. Detective Chen indicated that she had physical evidence hidden in multiple locations and could provide protection for witnesses if she received adequate backup. Together, we began planning what we called Operation Lifeline, a coordinated effort to extract as many potential victims as possible while gathering evidence that could be used to prosecute. The network's leadership. We had the advantage of working from within the system, but we also had to assume that our communications might be discovered at any time. I provided the others with detailed information about upcoming recruitment operations, scheduled victim transfers, and planned expansions of the network's activities. They used this intelligence to intercept victims before they could be trafficked, document crimes as they were being committed, and build cases against specific perpetrators. Over the next few hours, we managed to save 7 people who were scheduled for processing through the network's facilities. Dr. Walsh convinced handlers that 3 victims were psychologically unsuitable for trafficking. Agent Torres arranged for FBI intervention that prevented 2 international transfers. Detective Chen conducted routine traffic stops that resulted in the rescue of 2 victims who were being transported to processing facilities. Each success felt like a small victory against an impossible enemy, but I knew we were working on borrowed time. The network would eventually notice the pattern of failed operations and increased law enforcement attention. When that happened, everyone involved in our resistance effort would become targets for immediate elimination. The most heartbreaking part of the operation was realizing how many people we couldn't save. For every victim we managed to extract, dozens more were processed through facilities we couldn't access or transported through routes we couldn't monitor. The network was simply too large and too sophisticated for our small group to significantly disrupt, but we were documenting everything. Every crime we witnessed, every victim we couldn't save, every perpetrator we identified, all of it was being recorded in hidden files that could eventually be used for prosecution. We were creating an insurance policy for justice, even if none of us survived to see it implemented. As dawn approached and Victoria's deadline drew near, I realized that our resistance efforts had accomplished something more important than saving individual victims. We'd proven that the network could be infiltrated, that its operations could be disrupted, and that its members could be turned against each other. Most importantly, we'd established that people forced to participate in the network didn't have to remain passive victims. Even under the most oppressive circumstances, even when families were threatened and lives hung in the balance, there were ways to fight back and make a difference. The question now was whether I could survive long enough to continue coordinating these efforts, or whether Victoria would discover what I'd been doing and eliminate me before our resistance network could grow strong enough to seriously threaten her operation. In a few hours, I would have to face Victoria and pretend to make a choice between partnership and death. But the real choice had already been made. I would continue fighting from within the system for as long as possible, helping other reluctant participants resist their captors and saving as many victims as we could reach. Even if it killed me, at least I wouldn't die alone. Victoria arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, carrying 2 items that would determine my fate: a golden pen for signing the partnership agreement, and a small audio recording device that she placed on the table between us with deliberate precision. "Before you make your final decision, Ashley," she said, settling into the chair across from my bed, "I want you to hear something that might clarify your situation." She pressed play, and my blood turned to ice as I heard my own voice from last night's resistance activities. The recording was crystal clear: every message I'd sent to potential victims, every communication with Dr. Walsh, Agent Torres, and Detective Chen, every detail of Operation Lifeline. "Did you really think we weren't monitoring the tablet I gave you?" Victoria asked, her voice carrying a mixture of disappointment and amusement. "Ashley, dear, that device was designed specifically to test your loyalty. Everything you did last night was recorded and documented. The trap had been perfect. Victoria had given me access to the network systems not to educate me about their operations, but to see what I would do with inside information. My attempts to save victims and coordinate resistance had provided her with definitive proof that I could never be trusted as a partner. 12 people are going to die because of your actions last night," Victoria continued, consulting a list on her phone. "Dr. Walsh, Agent Torres, Detective Chen, and 9 others you contacted directly or indirectly. Their elimination has already been authorized and will be carried out within the next 24 hours. I felt sick as the implications hit me. My resistance efforts hadn't just failed, they'd doomed everyone who'd tried to help me. The people who'd risked their lives to save trafficking victims would now become victims themselves, and it was entirely my fault. "The 7 people you thought you saved last night?" Victoria smiled coldly. "They're already back in our custody." Dr. Walsh's psychological evaluations were overruled by higher medical authorities. Agent Torres's FBI intervention was blocked by his superiors. Detective Chen's traffic stops were reversed by judicial order. Your rescue operation accomplished nothing except identifying every resistance element within our network. She showed me photos on her phone, the same people I'd tried to save, now in processing facilities, their hope replaced by terror as they realized their brief moment of freedom had been an illusion. "This is what happens when amateurs try to fight against professionals," Victoria explained, her voice taking on the tone of a teacher correcting a particularly slow student. "You thought you were being clever, but every move you made was anticipated and countered. We've been playing this game for decades, Ashley. You've been playing it for one night." But then she leaned forward, and I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't expected: genuine respect mixed with regret. However, she continued, your performance last night was actually quite impressive. The speed with which you identified resistance elements, the efficiency of your communication network, the strategic thinking behind your coordination efforts, all of it demonstrated exactly the kind of skills we value in our organization. She picked up the golden pen and held it toward me. So I'm going to make you a revised offer, Ashley. Sign this partnership agreement, and everyone you tried to save last night will be released unharmed. Refuse, and they'll all die slowly and painfully, knowing that their deaths were caused by your stubborn refusal to be reasonable. The ultimate manipulation, using my own conscience against me. Victoria had turned my attempts to save people into leverage to force my compliance. By caring about others, I'd given her the perfect weapon to control me. You have 1 minute to decide, she said, activating a timer on her phone. After that, the elimination orders become irreversible. As the seconds ticked away, I realized that Victoria had made one critical error in her psychological manipulation. She'd revealed that the network was more fragile than she'd admitted. If my single night of amateur resistance had identified so many weak points and required such extensive countermeasures, then the system wasn't as invulnerable as she'd claimed. More importantly, she'd confirmed that there were other people within the network who wanted to resist but needed coordination and support. Dr. Walsh, Agent Torres, Detective Chen, and the others hadn't been discovered because of sophisticated surveillance, they'd been discovered because I'd contacted them directly. That meant there were probably many more potential allies who hadn't been identified yet. With 30 seconds left on the timer, I made my decision. I'll sign, I said, reaching for the pen. Victoria smiled triumphantly as I scrawled my signature across the partnership agreement, officially making me a willing participant in her trafficking network. But what she didn't know was that I'd hidden a small recording device in my clothing, the same type she'd used to document my resistance activities. Every word of our conversation, including her detailed confession about the network's operations and her casual admission to ordering multiple murders, was now preserved on a device that she didn't know existed. Welcome to the family, Ashley, Victoria said, embracing me like a proud mother. I think you're going to find our partnership very rewarding. As she left to begin my formal orientation into the network's leadership structure, I activated the recording device's emergency transmission function, a feature I discovered while studying the network's own communication systems somewhere in the world. A secure server was receiving Victoria Sterling's complete confession to running a global human trafficking operation. The recording included specific details about murder contracts, the locations of processing facilities, the identities of government officials who provided protection, and the financial structures that supported the entire enterprise. I was now officially a partner in the world's largest trafficking network, which meant I had access to information and resources that could bring down the entire operation. Victoria thought she'd won by forcing me to sign her contract, but she'd actually given me the perfect cover for destroying everything she'd built. The real game was just beginning, and this time, I would be playing by rules that Victoria didn't even know existed. 3 weeks into my partnership with Victoria's network, I had gathered enough evidence to destroy not just her operation, but the entire global trafficking conspiracy. My access to secure facilities, financial records, and communication systems had provided me with documentation that law enforcement agencies could only dream of obtaining. But Victoria wasn't stupid, and I could tell she was growing suspicious of my enthusiastic embrace of my new role. I'd been perhaps too efficient at my assigned tasks, too eager to learn about every aspect of the operation, too interested in meeting other regional coordinators and understanding the network's complete structure. The confrontation came on a Tuesday morning when Victoria called me into her private study, the same room where I'd first discovered the truth about her operation. She was standing behind her mahogany desk, but she wasn't alone. Marcus Chen and Robert Fitzgerald flanked her, along with 2 other men I didn't recognize but whose presence radiated the kind of menace that comes with professional violence. Ashley, Victoria said without preamble, we need to discuss some irregularities in your recent activities. She activated a wall-mounted screen that displayed surveillance footage from my apartment. But this wasn't old footage from before I'd joined the network. These were recent recordings showing me in activities that should have been impossible to document. The video showed me in my bathroom, apparently alone, speaking in whispers to what looked like empty air. But I knew what Victoria was really seeing, me providing detailed updates to a recording device hidden in my jewelry, documenting every crime I'd witnessed and every piece of evidence I'd collected. You've been very busy, haven't you? Victoria continued, clicking to audio recordings of conversations I'd had with other network partners. In each instance, I'd asked probing questions about their operations, their vulnerabilities, their fears about law enforcement. What had seemed like normal professional curiosity to them had actually been systematic intelligence gathering. The device you've been using to record our conversations, Victoria said, has been transmitting data to federal servers for the past 3 weeks. Did you really think we wouldn't notice eventually? I felt the familiar sinking sensation of a plan falling apart, but this time, I wasn't surprised. I'd known from the beginning that my deception couldn't last indefinitely. The question had always been whether I could gather enough evidence before they discovered what I was doing. The FBI has been receiving detailed intelligence about our operations, Markuschan added, consulting a tablet. Facility locations, transport schedules, client identities, financial structures, everything they would need to build comprehensive cases against hundreds of our people. Robert Fitzgerald leaned forward, his eyes cold with the kind of anger that comes from being outsmarted. What we want to know, Ashley, is whether you've been working with law enforcement from the beginning, or whether this is a recent development in your apparent psychotic break. I looked around the room at the 5 men who held my fate in their hands, then made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of denying their accusations or trying to negotiate for my life, I started laughing. You want to know the truth? I said, standing up from my chair with a confidence that came from knowing I had nothing left to lose. The truth is that I've been working with federal investigators for months, ever since I first discovered your operation. Everything you've done, every crime you've committed, every victim you've trafficked, all of it has been documented and transmitted to law enforcement agencies around the world. Victoria's face went pale, but I continued before she could respond. The partnership agreement I signed was fake, provided by FBI agents who've been building cases against your network for years. The recording device I've been using isn't some amateur equipment, it's military-grade surveillance technology designed specifically for deep cover operations. I pulled the device from my jewelry and placed it on Victoria's desk, where it continued blinking with an active transmission signal. Right now, as we speak, this conversation is being recorded and transmitted to federal servers. Every word you say, every threat you make, every admission of guilt, it's all being preserved as evidence for your prosecution. The silence in the room was deafening. I could see the wheels turning in Victoria's mind as she tried to assess how much damage I'd done to her empire and whether there was any way to contain it. But here's the beautiful part, I continued, feeling a surge of vindictive satisfaction. It doesn't matter if you kill me now. It doesn't matter if you eliminate every person in this room. The evidence has already been transmitted, the cases have already been built, and the arrest warrants have already been issued. I walked to the window and looked out at the peaceful Malibu landscape, knowing it would probably be the last beautiful view I'd ever see. As I speak, FBI teams are raiding your facilities in 12 cities. International law enforcement is executing coordinated arrests across 6 countries. Bank accounts are being frozen, assets are being seized, and victims are being rescued from processing centers around the world. Victoria finally found her voice. You're lying. This is impossible. Your security was compromised from the day I discovered your operation, I interrupted. Every partner you trusted, every secure communication you sent, every protected facility you operated, all of it was being monitored by people who are much better at this game than you ever were. I turned back to face them, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt genuinely powerful. The only question now is whether you want to surrender peacefully or whether you want to add resisting arrest and assaulting federal officers to your charges. Because either way, your trafficking network is finished, your victims are being freed, and justice is finally coming for everyone you've hurt. Through the window, I could see black SUVs racing up Victoria's private driveway, their emergency lights flashing as federal agents prepared to storm the mansion. The sound of helicopters grew louder as tactical teams surrounded the property. Victoria Sterling, humanitarian and human trafficker, looked at me with an expression of pure hatred and finally spoke the truest words she'd ever said to me. You have destroyed everything I built. Good, I replied, as the front door exploded inward and federal agents swarmed into the house. That was always the plan. The next few minutes passed in a blur of controlled chaos as federal agents flooded Victoria's mansion. I had expected this moment for weeks, but experiencing it was still surreal, watching the woman who had terrorized me and countless others finally facing justice. Ashley Klein? The lead agent who approached me was a tall woman with graying hair and intelligent eyes. I'm Special Agent Sarah Martinez, FBI Human Trafficking Task Force. Are you injured? The irony of her name wasn't lost on me, Sarah Martinez, like the young actress who disappeared into Victoria's network years ago. But this Sarah Martinez carried a badge and a gun, and she represented everything I'd hoped for during those dark weeks of captivity. I'm okay, I managed, though my legs were shaking as adrenaline finally caught up with me. Did you get everything? All the evidence I transmitted? Agent Martinez smiled grimly. We got more than enough. Your intelligence has led to the largest coordinated anti-trafficking operation in FBI history. We're executing simultaneous raids across 47 locations in 12 countries as we speak. Through the mansion's windows, I could see Victoria and her associates being led away in handcuffs. Victoria's perfect composure had finally cracked. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked like what she really was, a common criminal whose luck had finally run out. How long? I asked Agent Martinez. How long have you been investigating her? 3 years, she replied, helping me to a chair as crime scene technicians began photographing evidence throughout the room. We knew Victoria Sterling was involved in something, but we could never get close enough to gather proof. When you first contacted us 6 months ago, you gave us the break we'd been waiting for. 6 months ago. I tried to remember what had happened 6 months ago that would have led me to contact the FBI, but my memory of that period was fuzzy. The trauma of recent weeks had affected my ability to recall earlier events clearly. Agent Martinez seemed to understand my confusion. You probably don't remember the initial contact, she said gently. You discovered some irregularities in Victoria's charitable foundation and reached out to our financial crimes division. It seemed like a routine inquiry at the time, but one of our analysts recognized patterns that suggested something much more serious. She pulled out a tablet and showed me copies of emails I'd apparently sent months earlier. Reading them now, I could see that I'd been unconsciously documenting suspicious activities long before I'd understood their true significance. Questions about missing beneficiaries, concerns about unexplained financial transfers, requests for information about legitimate charity oversight, all of it had painted a picture that experienced investigators knew how to interpret. We've been protecting you longer than you realize, Agent Martinez continued. The surveillance equipment in your apartment? Some of it was ours, designed to monitor threats against you and document crimes as they occurred. The car breakdown that led to your capture was actually our attempt to extract you safely, but Victoria's people got there first. The revelation was overwhelming. While I'd thought I was fighting alone against an impossible enemy, federal agents had been working behind the scenes to build cases and protect me. My resistance efforts hadn't been futile amateur attempts, they'd been part of a sophisticated law enforcement operation. Dr. Walsh, Agent Torres, Detective Chen? I asked, remembering the people whose lives I'd thought I'd endangered. All safe, all cooperating witnesses, all working with us from the beginning, Agent Martinez assured me. Your communication with them helped us coordinate their testimony and evidence collection. None of them were ever in real danger, we had protection details on everyone involved. She showed me more surveillance footage, but this time it was FBI agents monitoring Victoria's people, documenting their crimes, and protecting potential victims. The scope of the investigation was staggering, hundreds of agents working across multiple jurisdictions, years of patient intelligence gathering, and coordination with international law enforcement agencies. The partnership agreement you signed was provided by our legal team, Agent Martinez explained. It was designed to give you access to the network's inner circle while protecting you from prosecution for any activities you were forced to participate in. Every action you took was documented and authorized by federal prosecutors. As we spoke, other agents brought updates on the global operation. Victoria's processing facilities had been raided simultaneously, leading to the rescue of over 200 trafficking victims. Bank accounts containing hundreds of millions of dollars had been frozen. Government officials who'd provided protection to the network were being arrested on corruption charges. The international coordinators? I asked, remembering the global scope of Victoria's operation. In custody or being pursued, Agent Martinez replied. This network has been operating for decades, but it's finished as of today. We estimate it will take years to fully investigate all the evidence you helped us gather, but the immediate threat has been eliminated. She handed me a secure phone. Your sister Emma is safe, by the way. She's been under protective custody since the day you first contacted us. The talent scouts who approached her were undercover FBI agents gathering evidence about the network's recruitment methods. Relief flooded through me as I realized Emma had never been in real danger. The FBI had been using her situation to test the network's response patterns while ensuring her complete safety. What happens now? I asked, looking around at the crime scene that had once been Victoria's seat of power. Now you get your life back, Agent Martinez said. You'll need to provide detailed testimony for the prosecutions, but the immediate danger is over. Victoria Sterling and her network can never hurt anyone again. As federal agents led me out of the mansion, I took one last look at the place where I discovered the truth about human trafficking in Hollywood. The beautiful facade remained unchanged, manicured. Gardens, elegant architecture, luxury cars in the driveway. But now everyone would know what had really happened behind those perfect walls. Victoria's empire of exploitation had finally fallen, and hundreds of victims would get the justice they deserved. The entertainment industry would have to confront its complicity in allowing such horrors to flourish in plain sight. And young dreamers like Emma would be safer because the monsters who preyed on their ambitions were now behind bars. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. The nightmare was over, and the healing could finally begin. The courtroom was packed as Victoria Sterling's trial began 6 months later. Media from around the world had descended on Los Angeles to cover what prosecutors called the largest human trafficking prosecution in American history. I sat in the witness section, clutching a thick binder containing the evidence that would ensure Victoria never hurt anyone again. The trial evidence binder represented months of painstaking documentation by federal investigators who'd analyzed every piece of intelligence I'd provided. Photographs, financial records, communication logs, victim testimonies, and recorded confessions, everything needed to prove beyond any doubt that Victoria had operated a global trafficking network that destroyed hundreds of lives. The scope of the case was staggering. Victoria faced 247 separate criminal charges, including human trafficking, racketeering, money laundering, murder, conspiracy, and international organized crime. Her co-defendants included dozens of entertainment industry executives, government officials, and international coordinators who'd helped operate the network. The evidence will show, the lead prosecutor announced during opening statements, that the defendant used her celebrity status and charitable foundation as cover for one of the most sophisticated and brutal trafficking operations ever discovered. Over the course of 15 years, she systematically identified, recruited, and exploited vulnerable young people who trusted her to help them achieve their dreams. As witness after witness testified about their experiences with Victoria's network, I began to understand the true scope of the damage she'd caused. Families who'd spent years searching for missing children finally learned the truth about what had happened. Survivors who'd escaped the network found the courage to speak publicly about their experiences. Law enforcement officials revealed how corruption and intimidation had prevented earlier investigations. The international investigation had uncovered trafficking operations on 6 continents, leading to over 500 arrests and the rescue of more than 800 victims. Bank accounts containing $1.2 billion in trafficking proceeds had been seized and would be used to fund victim services and prevention programs, but the most powerful testimony came from the survivors themselves. Young men and women who'd been trafficked through Victoria's network stood before the court and told their stories with remarkable courage and dignity. They described the false promises that had lured them into the system, the systematic abuse they'd endured, and the psychological manipulation that had kept them trapped. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Agent Michael Torres, and Detective Lisa Chen all testified about their forced participation in the network and their secret efforts to resist from within. Their testimony revealed how Victoria's operation had corrupted legitimate institutions and forced decent people to become unwilling accomplices through threats and blackmail. The financial evidence was particularly damning. Prosecutors showed how Victoria's charitable foundation had been nothing more than an elaborate money laundering operation, with less than 2% of donations actually going to legitimate charitable purposes. The rest had funded trafficking operations, bribed officials, and maintained the luxury lifestyle that supported Victoria's public persona. International cooperation had been crucial to dismantling the global network. Law enforcement agencies in London, Paris, Mumbai, Tokyo, and Sao Paulo had executed coordinated operations that eliminated similar trafficking organizations operating under Victoria's coordination. The network's international communications had provided roadmaps to trafficking routes and processing facilities that authorities had been searching for years to locate. When my turn came to testify, I spent 3 days on the witness stand describing my 4 years as Victoria's assistant and the weeks I'd spent gathering evidence of her crimes. The defense attorneys tried to portray me as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge, but the overwhelming evidence I'd provided made their arguments seem desperate and unconvincing. Ms. Klein, the prosecutor asked during my final day of testimony, what would you say to other young people who might find themselves in situations similar to what you experienced? I looked directly at Victoria, who sat at the defense table with the same cold expression she'd worn throughout the trial. Trust your instincts, I said. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And remember that there are people who will help you if you have the courage to ask for it. The verdicts came after only 2 days of jury deliberation. Guilty on all counts. Victoria Sterling would spend the rest of her life in federal prison, with no possibility of parole. Her co-defendants received sentences ranging from 15 years to life, depending on their level of involvement in the network. As the judge read the sentences, I thought about all the victims who would never see justice, the young people whose lives had been destroyed before anyone knew what was happening, the families who would never get their children back, the dreams that had been shattered by greed and cruelty, but I also thought about the survivors who were rebuilding their lives, the families who finally had answers about their missing loved ones, and the young people who would be safer because Victoria's network could never operate again. The entertainment industry had been forced to confront its complicity in allowing trafficking to flourish. New oversight mechanisms, mandatory reporting requirements, and victim protection protocols had been implemented across the industry. It would never be perfect, but it would be better. Most importantly, the prosecution had sent a clear message to anyone involved in human trafficking: no matter how powerful you are, no matter how sophisticated your operation, no matter how many people you've corrupted or intimidated, justice will eventually find you. Victoria Sterling had believed she was untouchable, protected by wealth, celebrity, and political connections. She'd thought her victims were powerless and her enemies were too weak to threaten her empire. She'd been wrong about everything. As I left the courthouse that final day, surrounded by FBI agents who'd become friends during the long investigation and prosecution, I felt a sense of closure that I'd never expected to experience. The nightmare was truly over, and the healing could continue. 2 years after Victoria's conviction, I stood in the conference room of the newly established Bright Futures Foundation, named deliberately after Victoria's fake charity, but this time dedicated to actually helping trafficking survivors rebuild their lives. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was using Victoria's own name and methods to undo the damage she'd caused. The victim support organization charter that hung on the wall represented everything Victoria's foundation had pretended to be: real programs to help survivors access education, job training, mental health services, and legal assistance. Genuine advocacy for policy changes that would prevent trafficking and prosecute perpetrators. Authentic support for families affected by trafficking crimes. Ashley, said Maria Santos, one of our program coordinators and a survivor of Victoria's network, the new intake interviews are scheduled for this afternoon. We have 12 survivors requesting services this month. Maria had been one of the young women rescued during the FBI raids. At 19, she'd been trafficked for 8 months before the network's collapse freed her. Now, at 21, she was finishing her college degree while helping other survivors navigate their own recovery processes. The psychological recovery process had been different for everyone involved. My own therapy had taken 18 months of intensive work with specialists who understood the unique trauma of discovering that someone you trusted had been exploiting you. The guilt, the self-doubt, the paranoia, all of it had required professional help to process and overcome. Some days I still can't believe it's real, I admitted to Dr. Patricia Williams, the therapist who'd been working with trafficking survivors since the network's collapse. Sometimes I wake up thinking I'm still trapped in that room at Victoria's mansion, waiting for her to come back with another ultimatum. Dr. Williams nodded with the understanding that came from helping dozens of survivors process similar trauma. Recovery isn't linear, Ashley. You've been through experiences that most people can't even imagine. It's normal to have setbacks, to struggle with trust, to question your own perceptions. What matters is that you're using your experience to help others heal. The foundation had grown far beyond what I'd originally envisioned. We now operated programs in 12 cities, providing services to over 300 trafficking survivors and their families. Our advocacy work had contributed to the passage of federal legislation that strengthened anti-trafficking laws and increased funding for victim services. My relationship with Emma had been another crucial part of the healing process. The months of protective custody had been traumatic for her as well, even though she'd never been in real danger. She'd struggled with guilt about her initial excitement over the talent scouts, and with anger about being kept in the dark about the investigation. I still have nightmares sometimes, Emma told me during one of our weekly phone calls. She was now a sophomore at Northwestern University, studying journalism with a focus on investigative reporting. Not about being in danger, but about what could have happened if you hadn't figured out the truth in time. Emma's decision to pursue journalism had been directly influenced by our experience with Victoria's network. She wanted to investigate stories that others might overlook, to give voice to victims who might otherwise be silenced, to shine light into dark corners where predators might be hiding. The thing that bothers me most, Emma continued, is wondering how many other operations like Victoria's are still out there. How many other young people are disappearing right now while we're just living our normal lives? It was a question that haunted all of us who'd been involved in exposing Victoria's network. The international investigation had dismantled one major trafficking operation, but everyone knew it was just one piece of a much larger problem. My work with Congress on trafficking prevention had opened my eyes to the scope of the challenge. Testifying before the House Judiciary Committee about weaknesses in current anti-trafficking laws, I'd learned that an estimated 25 million people worldwide were trapped in trafficking situations at any given time. The numbers are overwhelming. I told the Congressional Committee during my testimony. But every number represents a real person with a family, with dreams, with the right to live free from exploitation. We can't save everyone, but we can save the people we encounter if we're willing to pay attention and take action. The ongoing legal battles had been another aspect of the healing process. Civil lawsuits against Victoria's estate, the entertainment companies that had enabled her network, and the government agencies that had failed to investigate earlier complaints were still working their way through the courts. The money won't bring back the years that were stolen from trafficking victims, explained Jennifer Chen, the civil rights attorney handling our class action lawsuit. But it will provide resources for long-term recovery services and send a message to other potential enablers that there are consequences for looking the other way. My new mission as a champion for the vulnerable had given my life purpose in ways I'd never expected. Speaking at conferences, training law enforcement officers, and working with other survivor advocates had transformed my trauma into something that could help prevent others from experiencing similar horrors, but the work was emotionally exhausting. Every new case reminded me of my own experience, every survivor's story brought back memories I'd rather forget, every speaking engagement required me to relive the worst period of my life. It's important to maintain boundaries, Dr. Williams reminded me during our sessions. You can't save everyone, and you can't heal everyone. Your primary responsibility is to your own recovery and well-being. The establishment of my legacy as a whistleblower and advocate had been both rewarding and burdensome. Media attention had made me a public figure, which meant constant scrutiny and occasional threats from people who believed Victoria's network had been unfairly targeted. Some people will always prefer comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths, Agent Martinez told me when I expressed frustration about the criticism. But the survivors whose lives were saved because of your courage know the real truth. That's what matters. As I looked around the Foundation's conference room, filled with staff members who were dedicated to helping trafficking survivors, I realized that Victoria's greatest failure had been underestimating the power of human resilience. She'd built her empire on the assumption that victims would remain silent, that enablers would remain loyal, and that the truth would remain hidden. She'd been wrong about all of it. Victims had found their voices, enablers had found their consciences, and the truth had ultimately prevailed. The healing would continue for years to come, but the foundation we'd built would ensure that no survivor would have to face their recovery alone. 5 years after Victoria Sterling's conviction, I sat in a television studio in New York, holding the advance copy of my published memoir titled Shattered Illusions: How I Exposed Hollywood's Dark Secret. The book had taken 3 years to write, working through the trauma while ensuring that every detail was accurate and that the privacy of survivors was protected. Ashley Klein's book is more than just a memoir, the interviewer said to the camera. It's a roadmap for recognizing and resisting human trafficking, and an inspiration for anyone who's ever felt powerless in the face of overwhelming evil. The decision to go fully public with my story hadn't been easy. For years, I'd testified in closed proceedings and spoken at private conferences, sharing my experience with law enforcement and advocacy groups. But publishing a book meant exposing my story to millions of people, many of whom would judge, criticize, or simply sensationalize the horrors I'd witnessed. What I want people to understand, I told the interviewer, is that trafficking doesn't just happen to other people in other places. It happens in our communities, involving people we know and trust. Victoria Sterling was a beloved celebrity, a respected humanitarian, someone who appeared on magazine covers and gave inspiring speeches. If she could be a predator, then anyone could be. The book tour had taken me to 40 cities across the United States and Europe, speaking to audiences ranging from college students to law enforcement officers to government officials. Each speaking engagement brought new questions, new challenges, and new opportunities to educate people about the realities of human trafficking. The most important message in your book, the interviewer continued, seems to be that ordinary people can make a difference in fighting trafficking. Can you elaborate on that? I thought about all the survivors I'd met through the foundation, all the law enforcement officers who dedicated their careers to fighting trafficking, all the advocates who worked tirelessly to prevent exploitation. Victoria's network seemed invincible because it operated in darkness, I explained. But darkness can't survive when people are willing to shine light into it. Every person who reports suspicious activity, every survivor who speaks out, every advocate who refuses to give up, they're all part of the solution. The lasting impact on Hollywood had been profound and complex. The entertainment industry had implemented new oversight mechanisms, mandatory training programs, and victim protection protocols. But change had been slow and sometimes superficial, with some organizations more interested in managing their public image than addressing systemic problems. The industry is better than it was, I acknowledged when asked about reform efforts. But there's still work to be done. Predators are adaptable. When one method is exposed, they find new ways to exploit vulnerable people. Vigilance has to be constant. My advice for recognizing and resisting exploitation had become a central part of my advocacy work. Warning signs that seemed obvious in retrospect were often subtle in real time: isolation from family and friends, financial control, gradually escalating demands, threats disguised as protection. Trust your instincts, I told audiences repeatedly. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And remember that predators are experts at making their victims feel like they're willing participants or that they somehow deserve what's happening to them. The ongoing work to identify and prosecute remaining network members continued years after Victoria's conviction. International law enforcement agencies were still tracking down cells that had operated under her coordination, still rescuing victims from facilities that had somehow survived the initial raids. This isn't a problem that gets solved once and then goes away, Agent Martinez had told me during our most recent update meeting. It's an ongoing battle that requires sustained effort from everyone: survivors, advocates, law enforcement, policymakers, and ordinary citizens who are willing to pay attention. My final call to action for audience awareness and vigilance had evolved over the years as I'd learned more about effective prevention strategies. Education was crucial, but it had to be combined with practical action and systemic change. Awareness isn't enough, I told the television interviewer as our segment concluded. Awareness has to lead to action. Report suspicious activity to authorities. Support organizations that help trafficking survivors. Advocate for stronger laws and better enforcement. And most importantly, believe survivors when they tell their stories, even when those stories are difficult to hear. As I left the studio that day, I thought about how far I'd come from the terrified young woman who discovered horror in Victoria Sterling's antique desk. The journey from victim to survivor to advocate had been painful, challenging, and sometimes overwhelming. But it had also been transformative in ways I never could have imagined. If Victoria Sterling was serving multiple life sentences in federal prison, her empire destroyed and her victims free. The global trafficking network she'd coordinated was dismantled. Its leaders prosecuted, its survivors supported. Hundreds of young people who might have been trafficked were safe because the predators who would have targeted them were behind bars, but perhaps most importantly, the silence that had protected trafficking operations for so long had been shattered. Survivors were speaking out, advocates were organizing, law enforcement was coordinating, and society was finally beginning to confront the uncomfortable reality that exploitation thrived in plain sight. The work would never be finished. There would always be predators seeking to exploit the vulnerable, always be systems that could be corrupted, always be people who preferred comfortable ignorance to difficult truth. But there would also always be survivors willing to share their stories, advocates willing to fight for justice, and ordinary people willing to pay attention and take action. My name was Ashley Klein. I was a survivor, an advocate, and a living reminder that even the most powerful predators could be defeated by someone willing to shine light into the darkness. And if you've listened to my story, if you've been moved by the courage of the survivors I've described, if you believe that justice is worth fighting for even when it's terrifying, then you're part of the solution too. Like and subscribe if you believe that every person deserves to live free from exploitation, and that together, we can build a world where predators like Victoria Sterling can never again destroy innocent lives with impunity.